Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I am your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher in Los Angeles that expanded my classroom into the internet to try and promote unity and exposing the best ideas from connecting with people around the world. And I've been able to do that. And one of the people that I've connected to is my guest today. And I am really, really excited to talk to her. She is a mindset coach, a consultant, and a writer. And her name is Africa Brooke. Africa, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I was just saying before you press record that I am very inspired by the work that you do. We connected maybe in January of this year, of 2021. And I just dove into your work and I really loved the balance. It was very, very refreshing. So to be having this conversation is an honor. It really is.
Well, thank you. You know, I think just being naturally just very curious has led me down a good pathway. And getting feedback like that from people like you helps. And when I say people like you, Africa, like I'm already talking so calmly. Like it was like I kind of like balance off the energy of like the people I'm talking to. And
right.
You kind of came out of nowhere for me. Like you just, showed up on my feed, someone, reposted something of yours, and you just kind of showed up and you had 100,000 people following you on Instagram. And I was just like, whoa, who is she? And it just came with such wisdom. And when I say that you are a mindset coach, my initial reaction when I hear mindset coach is like a little bit of like a ugh, like an eye roll. It's like you can go do it, Tiger. Come on, you're like pay me so I can tell you can go do it.
Right.
And I was like, oh no.
Right.
But to put an anecdote in there, my wife at her business had something. She's an online entrepreneur, runs a beauty business and stuff, and she was attempted to be like canceled for something that she did that was not racist, but a few people, very small group of people, tried to cancel her essentially with this cancel culture that we have. And what helped her get out of it, she was very upset. She's pregnant and she's, up to 3 a.m, just crying, like, cause she's a soft-hearted person. So she's like, why are they being mean to me? This is going to affect my business and my employees and all that kind of stuff. She employs a bunch of women, and your videos helped her. And I saw her just watch your videos and the way that you would talk about cancel culture. And she just switched. Switched. And she just like, she acts like she's already been canceled. One of the things that you say, and she's so different now in the way that she approaches voicing herself and her concerns and her thoughts and things like that. And people are resonating with that. And it really is because of you. So thank you for that, for the person that I love dearly. But can you bring us into what you do? Because I'm excited to expose you to people that aren't used to you. So can you just tell them kind of what your approach is when it comes to mindset coaching? Because it is unique from what I've seen.
Absolutely. Wow. I really have to just allow for what you just shared with me to just soak in for a moment, because that really does mean a lot. When you have thousands of people that are connected to the work that you do, it can really start to feel there's a detachment that happens because it's always you. And I'm sure you experience this as well. You're always pouring messages out into the void and you never really understand the impact of your work. Maybe some people might comment and tell you that you've changed the way they think, but there's something quite different in having someone face to face, even though you're on the other side of the world like this, and they're giving you a very specific response, and you can actually see them and you can feel their energy. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me. I really, really do. I really do. And I also laugh when I hear the mindset coach. Oh, here we go. Okay, Tony Robbins. Right. Okay. Because I resisted that term for such a long time, but essentially the work that I do, mindset is a huge part of it, but it's really understanding human behavior. Why do we do the things we do? In terms of really understanding what is our belief system, what is our patterns, what are our responses when we're in certain environments, what are our triggers, really understanding the brain, essentially. That's how I work. And in terms of the areas that I focus on self-sabotage, the many different forms of self-sabotage. And one of the key elements of that, which I'm sure you can see in my work, is self-censorship. So I mainly work with people that are in the public eye, people that are visible on some level, but also people that are just everyday people like you and I, or small business owners that are, we live in a digital world, that have an element of visibility, but now they're finding that they're really starting to censor themselves because of the fear of the unknown. So that's what I focus on. But I would say human behavior and really understanding the brain and then integrating that and making it actionable. That's what I do.
Do you have a background in like neuroscience or something
Yes.
like that?
Yes.
You
Not
do.
neuroscience
Okay.
specifically, but positive
Psychology.
psychology.
Okay.
Positive psychology. That's what I
Okay.
have a background in. And hypnosis as well, which of
Hmm.
course is a psychological therapy. So I've used different methodologies that I use, but positive psychology is a huge part of that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had Dr. Nick Holton on my podcast maybe like a year ago or 8 months ago talking about positive psychology, and that was actually another one that I went
Right.
in like positive psych, like these terms. It
Uh-huh.
sounds like it sounds like bullshit. It does. It sounds that
Absolutely.
way. But then when he
Absolutely.
explained it, I was like, oh, okay. So it's just one of those things that's labeled weird, or maybe it's been co-opted by a lot of snake oil
Yes.
salesmen.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But in between that, my fascination with this actually stems from me getting sober 5 years ago.
Okay.
So I got sober 5 years ago when I was 24, and I had actually tried to get sober 7 times, but I'd relapsed 7 times before that. So when the eighth time started to feel a little bit different, I started to get curious about why that was. Something was different here, but what actually was it? And I started to, just through self study, I've always loved to read. I've always been very, very curious, um, which is why I like to speak very loudly about self censorship, because that curiosity was silenced by this very punitive culture that we're in right now. But I've always been very curious. So I was wondering what was different about this time. And I realized that even on a subconscious level, I over identified with being a drinker. I was wearing that as my absolute identity. There is no other way that there's a life for me outside of this. So another reason why I'm fascinated with how identity works, and um what we then make true about ourselves when we just reject this idea that this is all there is to me. So I realized that that was the key piece of that. And it can sound so simple, but it was profound, and it's kept me sober for 5 years, realizing that just by choosing to no longer identify as a drinker, of course, there were many other things that I had to deal with alongside that, but becoming curious and saying, what would life look like if me, Africa, if I was a non-drinker? What kind of things would I do? Where would I go? What would I say yes to? What would I say no to? What would I be willing to try? These are things that I had never explored before because I firmly held my identity of being a drinker. So anytime that I tried to get sober, I was only focusing on strategy. So no longer going to certain places. Maybe I'll have a glass of wine and have some water in between, just strategy. There was nothing happening on an identity level. So when I started to get curious about that is when the doors were open to me in terms of human behavior. Why do we do the things we do? How does identity work? Not just on a abstract level, but on a scientific level. How does it work? And then, that's when I actually started training in certain of the methodologies that we spoke about. And it's what led me to where I am now.
That's interesting, and congratulations on that. That's
Thank you.
I'm friends with a lot of people who I grew up in like a drinking culture in like a blue collar
Right.
town in Pennsylvania, and I've had my own drinking issues too, but I don't have the addictive element of that,
Mm,
which I'm very fortunate to have, or to
good.
not have. But I know the struggle. I've watched people struggle with that. When you talk about identity, Africa, like I've
Yeah.
had 90 people on this podcast, and it's been very diverse people. I've had
Mm,
4 different transgender people on the podcast. And what I've found is the way that they identify matters a lot. If you identify
mm,
as I had Lex Horowitz, who identifies as a trans activist. That is who they are, trans activists. But then I had
Yes.
Corinna Cohn, who is a trans woman she identifies as a computer scientist. She wrote a book, but it's on computer science. And the way that she approaches, issues in like the culture wars is very differently than the person who identifies as the activist.
Right.
And I see this with, people in a lot of like the activist like realms of our society, that if they identify as the activist, or they identify as just like a black person, or they identify as a white person, or they identify, that does limit them about how they're going to approach maybe the world. And I've noticed that in the people I've talked to in this podcast. What you're saying resonates.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that with me, because that also, it acts as an affirmation, and it's a reminder of what I already know, but to just hear that reflection back, it's so useful, because, and it just seems so obvious, doesn't it? When you say it out loud, that of course, if you identify as something very, very specific, there's a chance that you won't allow yourself to be exposed to something that might perhaps threaten that identity in a way. Makes perfect sense.
Well, for me, I'm in like I guess, intellectual sphere, even though I'm just a high school teacher. Like I kind of, I'm in those circles. And what I've done is, I used to have an ego about being right. So I want the right answer. I'm the guy who has the right answers. But when I switched that to, I'm the person who wants to find the right answers. My ego is up in, how dare you not try to, leave, how dare you leave this stone unturned when it comes to finding out the right answers, or trying to understand things better. That's how I identify. Is not that I know what's going on, but I identify as the person who wants to find out what's going on.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
A lot more opening. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That, even as you said that immediately just sounds and actually feels, even just with me hearing it, more expansive. It really is. I love that.
Thank you. Did you, one of the things that you are able to do, and I even see it in this conversation between us now, is you are able to articulate what people are feeling very clearly. And when my wife is a businesswoman, so she's in sales, and she said one of the things in sales is you have to identify how they're feeling and what they're going through better than they even can, because then if you have a solution, then it'll resonate with them. Did you, when you talk about cancel culture, when you talk about the culture wars and things like that, you are articulating in a way that people go, yes, that's exactly what it is. It's like it's what they know, but they aren't able to articulate. It's very like Jordan Peterson does that a lot, where he'll say something that you just know deep down, but you've never been able to like get it out.
Yes.
You do that. Have you had personal experiences with being canceled, being labeled, being attacked by the mob, so to speak?
No. No, I haven't. And actually, I believe that my no is quite important, because some people might assume that the only people that are talking about cancel culture are those who have been canceled. There's kind of this idea, this narrative, that the only people that are talking about this are people that want to excuse some kind of, behavior that they did. And now, they're creating this bogeyman cancel culture. But no, actually, I've never been canceled before. However, I was very much immersed in certain social justice spaces, leftist echo chambers, and I'm very much a left-leaning person, even though I will tell you, I hate even giving that disclaimer, because it always feels like something you need to say, as if to let the others know that, no, I'm not, I'm not one of them, I'm one of you. But I understand its relevance at points. But as a left-leaning person, I've been in certain spaces that are far left, where I've seen cancellation processes taking place, where I've seen that there's no room for anything else that doesn't subscribe to the dogmatic thinking that is just the default of the spaces. So even though I haven't been cancelled myself, I've been in those spaces that, in those spaces where things like that happen. And also, from working with many people over the years, I've worked with over hundreds of people at this point, personally. pretty much all of them have experienced cancellation on some level, especially because they are people that are hyper visible, which means they are, they're more vulnerable than the everyday person. But now it's getting to the point where even the everyday person with maybe even 50 followers online can be subject to such a violent experience. So that's a very long way of saying, no, I haven't been cancelled myself, but I'm very aware of the dynamics and how they work.
You are. You definitely are. And one of the things that you kind of exude is like you seem resolved, Africa. Like I don't. Maybe it's your process of sobriety. Maybe it's just like how you. Well, I can ask you what that is. But as a high school teacher, I am around teenagers, and teenagers are struggling. It's not easy being young. You're in the spot between being a child. You're a child basically when you're in 9th grade, and then you're basically supposed to be an adult when you leave in 12th grade. So you make that transition while you're in my classroom. And a lot of especially teenage girls are not resolved. And I watch, and it's getting worse because of social media. But I would love to. I guess what I'm saying is, if someone would attack you, I can just see you like just being like. I'm gonna do an impression of you, which is really bad. You'd be like, "Oh, sweetheart. Oh, like no, like I could just see.
No.
Yeah, like no, like that, like, and it's just so powerful because you don't get worked up. You just are like, that's not right, and you just like know it. And if I could take that and take these teenage girls that are just like they're so not confident in who they are, of course, because they're young, but I would love to get them to that point where they can just own who they are. They can just not be scared of judgments of others because they know that this person, their judgment of me is not accurate. I know who I am. How do you develop that?
Oh my goodness. I wish there was one simple gift wrapped answer. I wish there was. Well, there isn't.
Process.
And you know what? And what I'm about to say now definitely isn't the sexiest approach, but I truly believe that you have to go through some kind of adversity to get to that point. I really do. And this is where it comes back to my sobriety. My sobriety is 100% the driver of the person that I am now and everything that I do now. And the compassion that I'm able to show even the most vile people is because of my sobriety. Because when I wasn't sober, I could be very manipulative. I cheated, I lied, I did things that I would never, ever have thought myself to do in moments that I was sober. So I accept the shadow of humanity. I don't deny it. I accept the mess and the glory and the awkwardness that is in all of us. And because I've seen myself and other people in their absolute lowest, and the world of recovery really just allows you to be humbled and grounded in a way that most people don't have access to. So I truly believe that a confidence that can be felt on a soul level, the confidence that I have now, which is not omnipresent. It's something that I have to evoke, right? At times, if I'm feeling very challenged, of course, my primal nature is going to just be switched on, and I'm going to feel defensive in moments. But then I'm like, actually, no, there's a different way to respond, But I truly believe that a lot of the confidence that maybe I have and maybe other people have and maybe that even you have, you need to have seen some kind of adversity. That's what I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, mine was, I don't talk about it much on social media, but I went through a lot of health issues. So my early 20s, I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I had something called intracranial hypertension. And I got a lot of surgeries and was just stuck in a hospital bed for a long time. And then even just 4 years ago, I had another brain issue where I had a stroke, which was really strange. I was in great shape. And so I agree with you. That is, it kind of, you start focusing on more important things.
Yes.
You don't mind you don't sweat the small stuff as much, and I think that was, it's like, going through something tough, I tell all my students is like, you don't know yet what's good or bad. You don't know. Let's say you live to be 100 years old, which, young kids today, it's reasonable. You're 15, you're halfway through chapter 2. You don't know what's
Yes.
good or bad yet. You like, oh, I
No.
got to fail on this test, or this girl broke up with me. It's like, I went through breakups. Thank God, because I found my wife and I had beautiful children. They wouldn't exist if I didn't go through the pain of that breakup.
Right.
Pause. Like, let's just go with the story. Get to the end of the chapter
Yes.
or the end of the book, and we'll see what was good or bad. But you have to go through that. But when I guess when you're young, you don't have that kind of wisdom looking back of like, oh, I got over that, and that led to something good.
Mm-hmm.
Had this horrible thing happen, but it wasn't that horrible because it led to this. You get
Yes.
more, collect more of those.
Yes, exactly. And, coming back to that point where you were saying if someone was to try and cancel you or something
Mhm.
was to happen, I think you would respond in this way. It's because of exactly what you've said. My mind now immediately goes to the bigger picture, you know, and because I've been in those spaces where I see how cancellation works, and I realize that a lot of people are so hurt, a lot of people are so confused, a lot of people were brought into those spaces or so-called communities because they wanted safety, they wanted to be understood, they wanted to feel that they're part of something important, something big. And then what can then happen is that you get into these spaces and you start to realize that actually it's not what you were sold. So then you become
Mhm.
even more confused. But now you're part of the mob already. You just are. So you start to behave and respond in the same way that everyone else is. So it's this process that is not as simple as many people might think, that is just someone that's deciding to be mean behind the screen somewhere. It's a really elaborate process that is still quite new. We're trying to understand it, especially in a digital sense. So when I get a comment that is unkind or anything like that, or if someone tried to cancel me, I make a very conscious decision to humanize the person, even though instantly I will feel defensive. I will feel fucking annoyed because it's like, especially if it's something that is so, um, especially maybe if on an egoic level, I feel like I've just said something that is quite clear. This is common sense. This is somewhat right. And then someone says something maybe to completely derail the conversation, and they whatever they do, instantly I'm going to feel something. But then just as quick, I humanize the other person, and then I give myself space, because what's happening online, which is where we mostly engage, we've forgotten that we are allowed to take space to respond, right? And it doesn't help that we're on platforms that are specifically created for us to react. I mean, it's by design, it's not accidental, but I humanize the person. I give myself space to respond. I take myself back to those moments where I might have been that other person. I never really was, but there were times when I reacted as well. Um, and then I think of the bigger picture, that actually this is not even about me. This person is pretty much an actor in a script that they think they chose or they wrote, but they didn't really. So there's a process as well on my end that will result in me saying, oh darling, come on, no, that's not gonna work.
Something like that, right?
Something like
Yeah.
that, exactly. So there's a process on both ends, but
Yeah.
me humanizing the
Yeah.
experience is key in in every interaction I have. It has to be. It has
Yeah.
to be.
They're
Hmm.
human. They're not just. I got into a conversation on live yesterday with another teacher who just
I
disagreed with me
saw
on things.
that.
He saw some of that,
Yes.
and it was all about you're a white man and white men do this and what. It's like what. And I tried to say, like, don't you see me as your
Hmm.
fellow, like, brother, as a human? And
Mm.
he's like, yeah, but like that's not his default. So I was trying to do exactly what you're
Yes.
saying here. You
Yes.
use Instagram, as do I. Is that the platform that you use the most?
Oh, the only one. It's the only one
Okay.
I have. Yes.
It's well, so you're in the UK, but are you aware of Mr. Rogers?
No.
No. Oh, I think you'd like him. So
Really?
yes, Mr.
I'm
Rogers,
writing
Fred
it
Rogers
down.
was his name, and he was
Okay.
a children's television show host up until probably into the 90s, but it was like really big in like the 1970s and 80s, and I guess into the 90s. Just a
Hmm.
really like sweet man who did Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was the name of his show, and there's a documentary about it. But he was young and TV was fairly new in the 1950s, early 60s or something. He watched it and he goes, wow, what an amazing platform. But it's being used for like violent cartoons and kids are seeing, a lot of explosions and stuff. He's like, It's pumping right in front of children. Why are we not doing something beneficial? And that, when I saw him say that, like, I remember growing up with Mr. Rogers, but it hit me, because that's why I'm on social media, is it's so toxic. It's so poisonous. It's so divisive. And I'm like, but this is a way to connect human beings in a real way. And I get that it's, you know, a comment section, you can't really get a lot of nuance, but what you can do is say, hey, let's have a conversation. I found you through here, Africa. Like, I have Instagram lives. I try to talk to people. When someone, I say, wow, they're wrong. Like, maybe I'm wrong. The only way I can know is if we talk like this.
Yes.
And I am trying to bring something positive in education, in thinking and stuff to social media. And you having over 100,000 people following you, and, you know, I see your stuff shared all the time. It's really inspiring for me, because I go, maybe the reason why Instagram is so poisonous and toxic is because it's just new. It's like, it's such a new technology. We're trying to figure out what this is. So we're getting into our most tribal, primitive ways, but we can steer out of that. And it's actually very inspiring that you have a big following, because you have them following like as if you're like an influencer, but I don't think of you that way. And it makes me believe that we could be headed towards something better with social media, if that makes sense.
Yes. Oh, I agree. And just hearing you saying all of that, I could kind of feel like an excitement and calm at the same time, because I am right there with you. And seeing people like you and getting connected with you, because a few other people, when I first shared my open letter, why I'm leaving the cult of wokeness in January, a few people actually recommended your page to me. And you might not have even found me at that time. But a few people recommended your page to me, and I took my time kind of going through your work before I followed and connected. And interestingly enough, even when I had written that letter and it was out there in the world, I still had the remnants of what things used to be like in the echo chambers I was in before. So this idea that by following someone, and I had the same thing when I first started connecting with James Lindsay, actually, that by following someone who is critiquing that space, does that put me on the platter for potential cancellation? Because this is what a lot of people will think, that I agree with this person, but people can't see that I'm following them, because what if, right? All of these stories. But I discovered your work in January, and what I loved was exactly as you just said, using social media in a really potent and useful and healthy way, and encouraging conversation, because the reality is social media is going to be in our lives for a while. At the moment, it's actually pretty well integrated into our lives, whether we like it or not. And instead of just pointing out all the things that are wrong with it, and why don't we try and make it better? Why don't we start asking better questions? How can we make it better, right? And I'm hopeful and confident, because I believe we are in that space now, where it's gone through so many iterations, where it's no longer just a visual platform. It's no longer just where influencers hang out. Now there are thinkers, there are philosophers, there are so many different types of people. So we're kind of in that teething stage where we're figuring out, how do we make it work? And we need to ask better questions. And I believe you do that very, very well, which is why I really appreciate your voice on that platform.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'll accept that. I'll take that
Yeah.
in. Thank you. How did your friends, your crew, maybe your drinking crew, handle this? Because this seems like it was like a transformation for you. You know, I grew up in a very blue collar steel town and stuff like that. So when I went online, when I became like an Instagram person, like a lot of my friends I grew up with were like, who is this guy? What are you doing? Why are you talking to your phone? Like, that's so like douchey. Like, it was uncomfortable for me too. Like, I don't feel comfortable. Like, hey guys, how you doing? Like, I don't feel comfortable doing it, but I believe in it.
Yes.
And that sounds really corny, and people don't get it who aren't in it, but like I think you get it. But my friends they rejected that pretty hard. I think now they just kind of roll their eyes. They're like, all right, do whatever your Insta famous stuff. But like, how did your group react to you being this?
That's a very interesting question. And the simple answer is who I am now didn't just happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight. So the account that I have now has been around for 5 years. So I've been sharing and speaking in the way that I do for 5 years. And I always say this, but even if you were to scroll down to the very first post, I started this account because I needed to hold myself accountable to my sobriety. It was never going to be for anything else. It was not for business. It was not for a brand. I started this account because I needed help. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what my starting point was going to be. I just knew that I had to get sober. And because of cultural shame and taboo and stigma, I'm from a very conservative African home. And a lot of African people are it's a very conservative culture, very traditional, very religious. And, things like therapy or rehab are never really seen as the first option. Church is the prescription. Anything is going wrong, prescribe church, right? But being 24 and living in the Western world and not being religious and not having any sober friends, social media, I was like, okay, I will use this page as a diary to just share my story. Whenever I feel like I'm going to drink, I will write something. Whenever I think, thoughts that could easily pull me back, I will share something. And then I started using hashtags because I was working in media and advertising, started using very specific hashtags, sobriety London, sober London, to just see if I could connect with anyone. That's how it started. So it was me just sharing my story. But before this page existed, for maybe 5 to 6 years prior to that, probably since I was 17, I was always very much in the digital space. I had blogs. I used to share stories. I used to do interviews with people that were in the public eye, people that did different things on a smaller scale. So that transition into me being the person that I am now was quite organic, actually. And it wasn't strange at all. But because I was speaking about my sobriety to begin with, my friends and people that knew me personally, I think more so, instead of thinking of, oh, you're online and you're using social media, it was more so what I was sharing, because this is something that would shame other people, might feel ashamed about, and they would keep it behind closed doors. But I was doing something different. I was so open with everything that I was experiencing, everything that I had done, so that progression has always been quite natural. So by the time I started exploring this on a more professional level, maybe 2 to 3 years on, it was a very seamless transition actually into who I am now. So there were no kind of glitches in the process.
So you've maintained friendships with a lot of those people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's very cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's great. I am inspired, and I learned so much from so many people that I've never actually met, but I've had conversations just like this, and I follow what they're doing on social media, and I get very inspired. And it's like accountability. It's kind of like, okay, these people are doing it. I can do something like that. I can be strong, and I can, like, approach people as humans, even when I just want to like own them. Like, I get it. I want to, I really could. But like, that's not going to be the way that I'm trying to hold myself to something better.
Yes.
I really am. And,
yes.
And my question for you is, who do you give me tremendous compliments, and that really resonates, and I'm going to be carrying that for a while. But yes. Who out in the world inspires you? Who do you admire, that as like, oh, like their approach is nice, or just something about them? Like, I'm always curious, like who have been your like influences in your thinking and things like that.
Yeah. The list isn't very long, because for some reason it takes me, for me to really hold someone as my inspiration, they really need to have made me feel something. So I do want you to know that when I give you compliments, it's not because I'm on your podcast and I'm just trying to be polite. I wouldn't say anything if I didn't mean it. But the people that I really hold as inspirations, and the people that have helped me in my process and journey now, number one, I would say an incredible woman who has passed on now, called Debbie Ford. She's an author, and she was She was a thinker as well, Debbie Ford. She's absolutely incredible. Her work can seem maybe what some people might call quite woo-woo and abstract, but she really introduced me to my mind in a way that I had never thought of before. And Michael A. Singer, who wrote a book called The Untethered Soul, which I think you would appreciate. He is also one of my absolute biggest inspirations. That book in early sobriety for me was instrumental. It really, really was. And someone else that I find to be really, really, really important in my journey in general is, a name I never thought I would say, Jordan Peterson. I love him. And you might have seen the video that I did not too long ago, and also did a podcast talking about how I really bought into his misrepresentation in a way where I truly wish, and I know this day is going to come very soon, that I could just sit opposite him and just tell him about this experience, because my goodness, that is what has also really opened my eyes to cancel culture and just how the media works and the manipulation that we buy into without even asking ourselves, what do I really think? Do I know enough to actually have an opinion that I'm going to choose to hold as an absolute truth? Right? But Jordan Peterson, I absolutely love. Ayesha Nkambi, she's fantastic. Thomas Sowell, fantastic as well. Only recently got introduced to him. I mean, here in the UK, that's not a name that most people would even know, surprisingly.
Oh, he's good.
Right?
He gets politicized so much, but he's got his ducks in a row. He's a well
Right?
sorted out thinker. Yeah.
Oh, he really is. And I also really appreciate John Ronson. Are you familiar with John
I'm
Ronson?
not.
Oh, he's fantastic. He's the author. He's a journalist and an author. He wrote a book in 2015 called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. And it's one of the very first books to talk about cancel culture before we even called it that. And his writing style is very conversational. It's humorous. I think you'd really enjoy it. And he also has another book that I would love to recommend to you and your listeners. It's called Them. And he spends time with extremists. He wrote this book in 2000, right? So it's 21 years old. But he spent time with extremists, Alex Jones before he was who he is now, David Icke before he was who he is now. And that's when they broke into, what's that place called? Bohemian Grove.
Yeah.
And he documents that entire experience. He spends time with Mormon. It's such a fantastic book. I think you'd enjoy it as well. So
wow.
those are some people that I can think of on the top of my head right now that I find very inspiring and very different. And you're on that list as well.
Oh, well, thank you. Jordan Peterson was probably my biggest, I've never had an educational mentor like in my field, but he's probably the biggest thing. And I've been fortunate enough to go see him speak live, and I would go talk to him afterwards, because you could go up and talk to him. And he was just like, actually listening to everybody, like actually listening and taking it in. It was very interesting guy. Seems like a bit of a tortured soul right now, but he's, got a high horsepower brain. He seems to be directing it towards something positive.
Right. Could I also ask you what your list is, who your inspirations are, or the people that have really expanded your mind in ways you didn't expect?
Oh yeah. So it's like a long list. All these people just gave a little bit. It's like a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Oh yes.
The Righteous Mind.
Him? Oh, he's fantastic.
He is. Yeah. And it's very cool that I've formed a relationship with him now, working with his organization, because he's in person
Beautiful.
too. He's so, just like very clear in his understanding of morality. And it's not as simple as you're immoral. It's just you're differently moral, like taste buds. So again, when you say you look for the common humanity in people, that helps me. It's like, oh, you think this way because, including your brain chemistry and stuff. Oh, that's why. Oh, okay. You're not a bad person. You just think you're good in this way. Oh, that makes sense. Then we all do that. So that's a big one. And how I kind of got exposed to a lot of people was the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes.
And it's strange because, you know, got into it because I like martial arts and stuff. And he's like, you know, a stand-up comedian, dirty stand-up comedian, cage fighting commentator. So I was like, oh, this will be a way to just unplug my brain on the way to work. And it's not. He would bring people on long form podcasts. And that's how I found Jordan. That's how I found Eric Weinstein. That's how I found all these different people. And I was just like, oh, okay, well then I will go learn about them and then learn about them. So his podcast was like a launching point for me to learn about all these different people and things like that. There's a bunch. But you know, and then there's Thomas Sowell, I think is really fascinating because again, even in America, I mean, he's a tenured professor at Stanford who has done a lot of things. He's 90 years old, still publishing books, but he's not brought in on the conversation nearly enough. Over the summer when it was like Elevate Black Voices, what I found was a bunch of teachers were elevating only progressive left Black voices. And I said, well, that's not an accurate representation. That makes people believe this monolith type of idea.
Exactly.
It was very frustrating.
And it happens here. It happens here as well in the UK. And again, it's not accidental. Like a lot of things, it's by design. It's not accidental. But what I also really love about social media is the fact that you and I are able to even have this conversation. To me, that's a sign that things are shifting in a really beautiful way. And this is why I love people like Aisha, because she showed people, I truly believe she was really one of the first to start having these conversations, especially here in the UK. Even a few years ago, even 4 years ago, at a time when no one was making space for anything like this to really exist. So I feel hope is also something that I hang on to, and it can feel cheesy to people that go, oh yeah, hope. But I truly believe that people like you and I and those who listen to it, they know what that means, because you can still hang on to the hope just by looking at what's actually around you. The fact that people like you and I are able to have conversations, the fact that you were able to have the conversation at the time of this recording yesterday with that other teacher, that is a sign that there's something there. There's something there that we need to hold on to. Even when we feel frustrated, even when it feels so seductive to just dehumanize someone and just allow your ego to relish in the goodness of it, because it feels good. It feels good.
Yeah.
Right? But hope and just choosing to humanize everyone and understanding that everything is a case by case, I truly believe those things can help. They can help quite a lot.
Absolutely. You know, I just saw Candace Owens is pushing to cancel Chrissy Teigen over like some bad tweets. And I follow a very diverse people I agree with, people I don't. The people I don't agree with, I follow too. And she's playing the cancel culture game. And it's not just a left thing. And I think people, but it's so easy to fall into those traps. If you're left, if you're right, if you're all and again, we need to get back to like, you're a person. And I get it sounds like this taken out of context. I don't think it'll feel like this to you, but to people it's like, oh, you poor cisgender straight white man. Like, but I get judged a lot just because I look like me. And I say, let's have a conversation. People make assumptions about me all the time. And it's like, it's okay. I get it. And I have to get it. But it still sucks. Like, I just want you to see me as a person. So that's like an attempt. That's something that I recognize that I'm going to have to do. But people have to do that who are whatever they are. If you are trans, if you are you as a Black woman, like there's all these different things that people are going to come in with the judgment, and you recognize that. But then you can win them over.
Yes, it's true. It's true. It can take a little while, but it's very much possible. It is.
Yeah. So, just wrapping this up. Thank you so much, Africa. Where can people? So Instagram is just Africa Brooke.
Yes, exactly. Africa Brooke with an E at the end. And my first name is not Brooke. It really is Africa. Okay. You can find me on Instagram, and other platforms that I have actually, which aren't social media related, but I do have 2 podcasts. So I have one podcast, which is called Beyond the Self. And in this podcast, I focus on self-sabotage. So it's all about the individual. And then I have my second podcast, which is Unfiltered with Africa Brooke. And this is where I focus on what I call collective sabotage, which is what we are seeing play out in culture right now. So those are the 2 places you can find me outside of Instagram.
Okay, and I'll put links and stuff like that.
Thank you.
I'm heading off into my day now because it's morning here. Just like calm, like it's so, like I'm always like a go 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 go, and you just have such a calming presence, and you've given me more sincere compliments in this podcast than I've gotten from any of my other guests, and it's from you, who I respect so deeply. So it's not just like a compliment from anybody. Like I feel like I believe you when you say you don't just give those out haphazardly. So
right.
Thank you. This was a really nice conversation.
Oh, it really was. Thank you for even considering me to be a part of your podcast, because you've had such brilliant people on. I can't wait to go into your archive actually, and just listen back on some of the conversations you've had. And something tells me that we might need a part 2 quite soon. I'm doing quite a lot of research at the moment on just how mob mentality plays out, not just in what we're seeing right now, but just in different cultures. I'm also really curious just about what I call collective sabotage. And yeah, there are a lot of really interesting findings that I think would be useful, not just for you and your adult listeners, but also to your students as well. So I'll be in touch so we can do a part 2.
Yeah. Oh, I would love that. I mean, anytime. So thank you so much, Africa. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Too.